All right, I'm going to get started. Audio is connecting slow, but I'm Sujata Gibson, and this is, I believe, the fifth of the Green New Dream series. I am here talking with a hero of mine, Howie Hawkins, who is running for president on the Green Party ticket, and very honored to have you here today, Howie. Thank you so much for coming.
Well, thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
We want to talk about fair elections. How do we make our election process fairer? How do we make it so that people can vote with their hearts instead of playing some kind of chess game? You know, people should just be able to vote for who they want to vote for. And it's been too long that we feel like we're choosing between the lesser of two evils and doing some strategic thing about who's going to raise the most money, who's going to be most successful at this or that. We got to vote for people who are going to make the system better, like Howie and others that are going to do things. And I'm not saying, you know, this party or that party, but how do we make it viable so that people don't have to always be worried about Donald Trump or someone like him looming in the background? So let's start by saying, let's get into the details right away. So one of the questions we have is, there are these two systems kind of on the table, ranked choice and approval voting, to kind of make it more possible to vote for a third party. So have you had experience with these systems, and which one do you think is better of the two?
I have had experience with the Green Party primaries. Most of them use either strict proportional, they just take the vote in the primary and allocate delegates to the candidates based on how many votes each candidate got. So if you got 50% of the votes, you get half the delegates from that state. Other parties did, like some of the Democratic primaries did, or caucuses did, and they had a 15% cutoff. I believe New York did that in the Green Party. So if you didn't get 15% of the total votes cast in the first round, your votes were eliminated and your votes were then transferred to their second choice. So that was a ranked choice vote. And that process continued until everybody left had reached 15%. And then the delegates were allocated proportional to the votes that each candidate received. And then some states did approval voting. And the problem with approval voting generally is you can't rank your choices. You can't state your preferences. So the person that you think, okay, I approve of them because they're okay, versus the person that you really want. In approval voting, you can't distinguish. And you can envision many scenarios where somebody that most people prefer the most actually doesn't get all the approvals or the majority of approvals, and they actually lose. So that doesn't seem like a good outcome. And in practice, it's very complicated when we're allocating delegates among a number of candidates. So that's a multi-member proportional representation system. And the math on approval voting for that, people can look it up online. You know, that's college math. And it's not calculus or anything like that. It's just, you know, it's mathematics, but it's very complicated. And the formula is not intuitive.
Okay.
The ranked choice vote, it's very simple. In a single member seat, you need a majority of votes to win. If nobody gets, and then what you do is you rank your choices. It's easy as 1, 2, 3. Your first choice is 1, your second choice is 2, your third choice is 3, and so on. And then if nobody gets a majority in the first round, the last place candidate is eliminated, and the second choices on that candidate's ballots are redistributed. And you keep going through that process until somebody gets a majority. It's very simple. Everybody can see how it works. You can do it with piles of paper on a table, and everybody can observe, you know, who's got the least amount. You redistribute them. You keep doing that till somebody meets majority. I've conducted elections where you had 3 choices. This was an assembly. It's actually the Green Party in 2004. How many want to run all out in every state? How many don't want to run a candidate at all? Get rid of Bush. And how many want to run what was called a safe state strategy? We only run in the safe states where we already know what the outcome is. So people moved to the different corners. And then we saw which corner had the least. And so those people redistributed themselves to the other 2 choices. And it was clear who was the majority. It's very intuitive. It's very easy to understand. And you get to choose your preferences. With approval voting, what it does is because somebody you barely approve of versus somebody you're enthusiastic about, a lot of people bullet vote. So for example, I went to Dartmouth College, and for a while they were electing the alumni trustees by approval voting. And a lot of people got angry because certain candidates campaigned saying bullet vote, only vote for me, not everybody you approve of. And so they got rid of it for the alumni board. The Independent Party of Oregon did the same thing in 2016, and they found out that all the Trump voters were bullet voting. And he almost won, even though he got a total number of approvals lower than anybody else.
Right.
So there are a lot of problems, and the system can be gamed with approval voting. Whereas ranked choice voting is very intuitive. And you can use it for multi-member legislative bodies to get proportional representation. And it's the same principle of distributing ballots to second choices. It's a little more complicated than counting because when you have multi-seats, like if it's 10 seats in a district, it's 10% plus one is the winning threshold. So somebody gets 20% of the vote in the first round as first choices, half their ballots have to be distributed. So they're distributed as half votes by their second choice. And then you eliminate the last place candidate. It's a little more complicated, but that process continues until you get, in this case, 10 people past the 10% threshold. And so that way we can use ranked choice voting to have legislative bodies that have all the parties represented in proportion to their real support. So the Green Party in New York, if we didn't have this winner take all plurality winner system where people are incentivized to vote for the lesser evil, you know, maybe we're a 20% party. We should have 20% of the people in the legislature. You know, I got 5% in 2014 running for governor. We got no representation in the state legislature. I got 48% running for the council district I'm sitting in. My supporters got no representation in that election. So there's a lot to be said for proportional representation. And if we adopt the, you know, instant runoff voting either for single member districts or legislative bodies, then there's no reason to vote for the lesser evil.
Right.
You know, and in my race, the most common question I get from the mainstream media is, are you going to spoil the election for Joe Biden? And my answer to that is no, Joe Biden and the Democrats have spoiled it because since Ralph Nader ran, we've been giving them the proven nonpartisan solution. Get rid of the Electoral College and have a ranked choice national popular vote. And, you know, Maine does that now for their presidential electors as well as their state officers. And as they used to say, as Maine goes, so goes the nation. So I think ranked choice voting is an idea whose time has come, and it's an issue. It's a major issue for my campaign.
How hard do you think it'll be to get ranked choice voting in New York? What are the barriers and what are the steps, do you think, to get there?
Well, we have it in 23 cities and counties across the country. And I think this is one of those things you build from the bottom up. So we should be in our cities, in our towns, pushing this and educating people about it. And at the state level, you know, we're getting the opposite. You know, the Governor Cuomo pushed very hard to triple the requirements for third parties to be on the ballot. It used to be you get 50,000 votes every 4 years for governor. Now you got to get 135,000 or 2%, whichever is greater, every 2 years. President, governor, president, governor. The only candidates for the Green Party that ever got that many was Ralph Nader in 2000 and me in 2014. And then if we lose our ballot line, instead of 15,000 signatures collected in a 6-week window, we got to get 45,000.
Wow.
So when the New York Times found out what Cuomo was up to, they called it the Democrats' secret plan to kill third parties. And this passed during the coronavirus budget under the radar. So, you know, people talk about the Republicans suppressing the vote, the Democrats suppress parties, which suppresses the vote. We bring people who otherwise wouldn't vote. 61% of Jill Stein's voters in 2016 said in the exit polls, if she wasn't on the ballot, they wouldn't have voted. You know, and the Democrats attack us, but you know what those people do? They go down ballot, they don't see a green, they're going to vote for the Democrat.
Right.
You know, when Nader ran in 2000, the number of voters he brought, judging from exit polls, to the polls were the margin of difference for Debbie Stabenow in Michigan and I'm forgetting her name right now, a woman in Washington in narrow elections. So, you know, the Democrats need to worry about getting their own base out. We're not their biggest problem.
So what do you think some of the other things we can do to make elections more accessible?
Well, right now we have a huge issue, and that is this coronavirus election. And the Democrats passed what was called the HEROES Act with money for mail-in ballots last month. And right now, Trump is opposed to that because he figures his best shot is if people can't vote. Greg Palast has documented that 17 million people have been purged from the voter rolls, disproportionately people of color who are likely to be Democratic voters. So, he talks about it. Trump talks about rigged elections. Yeah, he knows exactly what he's talking about because that's what he and the Republicans are trying to do.
Well,
we need to have a mail-in ballot. And the Republicans right now are saying they're not even going to look at this stuff till after the July 4th recess, which is 2 weeks after the 4th of July. If the money's allocated for this at the end of July, August, it's too late, to get the system set up to be able to do this. So a lot of people are on the street right now. They should be demanding, we want an election and we want the option of a mail-in ballot. I think that, right now is probably top of the list of election reforms we need to be speaking out about.
Well, how do you answer people who are worried that mail-in ballots, that people will commit fraud somehow, somebody else will get it and send it in?
We've had mail-in ballots long time, a lot of called absentee ballots. And we have states that offer universal mail-in ballots, and they catch fraud. It's 1 in a million. I don't remember the exact numbers, but it's minuscule. The real fraud is knocking people out the voter rolls so they can't vote. That's stealing an election. That's the kind of fraud we got to watch out for.
I remember 4 years ago when this was happening, the cross-check program was happening, and just millions of voters were being purged. It was outrageous and so clear that this was going to throw the election. How do we stop this? What can we do to stop this from happening over and over again?
Well, we got to expose it. We got to talk about it. We got to call the Republicans out on it. They're the ones mainly doing that voter suppression. And then we got to have people like you that are lawyers in the polling places on election day. I mean, we've had it, I live in a mostly Black community in Syracuse, and I've gone to the vote at times, and there are these lawyers questioning people's right to vote who are, so then we had to start getting our lawyers to make sure people had, counsel so they could get the right to vote. We're going to have to do that. We got to watch the polling places. And it's got to be all out.
Making a note, gonna call out all the lawyers to stand by, which is something that we should all be able to do, an easy fix. But so do you think they're really going to cancel the election in November? Is that
well, Trump would like to, but he can't. That Congress has to do that just legally. Right. And I don't think American people stand for that. I mean, they're in the streets right now. That would be so obvious. That would just provoke an uprising like we've never seen. I don't think that'll happen. They're going to try to, do tricks like suppress the vote, make it hard for people to vote. And then Trump, if he's losing, is going to start saying the whole process is rigged, even though he's the one trying to rig it.
What are some?
And that's what we got to watch out for. I don't think, he's going to be able to call it. Armed forces won't, back him up to steal an election. Right. I just know anecdotally from family, and I'm a Marine Corps veteran. I've talked to Marines. They all say Trump can go to hell. We fought for the right to people to go out and protest. That's what America's about. And so I'm not worried about that. What I am worried about is he will call out these right-wing militias, and they'll cause mayhem. I mean, we saw yesterday in New Mexico, a militia showed up and, somebody got shot. He actually wasn't with the militia. He was another right-winger, but he brought a handgun in a confrontation. That's very provocative, and those people are dangerous. So that's what I'm more worried about around election time. If Trump's losing, they might come out and cause some problems. So, but I think he's going to be crushed. I mean, he's totally blown the coronavirus crisis. The economy's in a depression. He has no clue how to get it out. I mean, this is a guy that he went bankrupt owning a casino. This guy's not a businessman. He knows how to spend money. He spent his daddy's money. He spent money he borrowed and never paid back.
Mhm.
We don't know where he got all this money, all this cash money to buy. He used to borrow money to buy real estate. In the early 2000s, he started paying with cash. And we don't really know where that money came from. This guy, man, oh man, we know in New York how crooked he is.
Right.
So he doesn't know how to get out of this depression. And then, his lack of empathy. I mean, people have seen the police murder George Floyd, and they saw this guy shot in the back, Rayshard Brooks down in Atlanta. And they're hearing the story about Breonna Taylor. And then they're seeing the police attack nonviolent protesters all over the country. A lot of people are waking up and saying, wait a minute, that's not what the police were supposed to do. So Trump is,
It is
if
really,
Biden can't beat Trump, the Democrats can't do anything.
it's so out of control. I mean, it's a little off topic, but I work, I'm on the national defense team of the National Lawyers Guild, the mass defense team, and I'm getting a lot of calls from all over the country. And it's just the level of violence from the police at these protests is really, when people are getting shot in the eyes with all these rubber bullets, real serious injuries are happening. The police are just beating people up, taping up their badges. I know that happens sometimes, but it's really escalated. It's alarming.
Yeah,
Um,
there's a lot of incidents online.
yeah.
I mean, that's why people are getting outraged. Police brutality and racism. People of color known about that a long time, but now white folks see it online and they're like, no, this is not what we're supposed to be about. And they're coming out in the streets too. And they're already angry because of what coronavirus has done to their livelihoods. And they see this incompetent response to the coronavirus in terms of the health aspects. So the white people are mad too now.
Yeah.
So, it's encouraging that people are out from all backgrounds on the streets together.
Yeah. What are some, like, but leaving aside the dramatic events going on right now with the police and these militias and everything, what are just the normal, there's a lot of barriers that make it harder for people to vote, and that you kind of referenced. What are some of these barriers that are making it so hard for people to vote, harder than it should be?
Well, the way they purge people is, lower income people, disproportionately people of color, they're renters, they move more.
Mm-hmm.
And then the way they purge them is the address where your actual residence now is different than the residence you registered to vote in. And oftentimes it's within the same election district. So you're a qualified voter, but they purge you. And then you show up at the place to vote and they say, the best we can do is a provisional ballot if you even get to do that. And then often they don't count those provisional ballots, which are paper ballots you fill out at the polls. So, that's one way people are purged.
Right.
And then, most countries, they'll have elections on the weekends. We have it on Tuesdays when people have to work. And for a lot of people, particularly lower income working people, they can't afford to take off the time, especially when they don't put enough polling places in working class communities. I mean, we saw what happened in Atlanta the other day. We saw what happened up in Milwaukee. A city that normally had, I think it was 80 or 90 polling places, had 5 in the midst of a pandemic. That discourages people from voting. So you need enough polling places. You need people trained to administer the polling places. You need election day to be a holiday or to be on the weekend. Extended hours. We're starting to do that in New York. And the right to do a mail-in ballot. My little brother is a printer and his bread and butter is printing voter information guides in California. So in California, every candidate gets 250 words to describe what their campaign's about. Every party gets 250 words to describe their principles. Every ballot initiative has a 250 word pro and con. So you get this whole booklet. You can study the election. You can hear directly from the candidates.
Mm-hmm.
And you have a mail-in ballot. So, and that goes out like a month before the election. So that encourages participation. But I think the biggest problem is, and this is disproportionately working class people, disproportionately younger and people of color, they don't vote because they feel it doesn't make any difference. They feel powerless. They
Right.
feel the candidates that come out aren't from their communities. They don't know them. They don't think those politicians know their problems, what their lives are like, what their concerns are. And they feel it doesn't make any difference if they vote. And then they tune out, because if you feel powerless, it's just painful to know what's going on and what needs to be improved. But if you can't do anything about it, you're like, why should I even pay attention? It just makes me upset. That's, I think, the biggest thing we got to overcome. And, that's what I've been telling the Green Party folks. So like, if we're going to become a major party, we got to talk to these people. Not go out and preach like activists do. Here's the leaflet, join us. We'll go out and listen and learn and build relationships and friendships. And when our party has chapters in those communities where people know us by name and trust us, then when we get smeared by the Democrats or the corporate media or whoever, they'll say, well, no, we know these people. And so I think that's the task, not just of the Green Party, but all the progressive movements, is we've got to convince the people that, there's one friend of mine, I've been trying for years to get him registered to vote. And he said, no, I'm not going to get caught up in their game. I'm not going to be a sucker. Mm-hmm. And I always tell them that's their game. They don't want you to vote, so they don't have to pay attention to you. But you know what? And this is a Teamster that I used to work with. Every time something happened in the news, when I got to work, he looked me up and wanted to know what I thought about it. Mm-hmm. He didn't want to get my take on it. He was following the news. He was so alienated from the system, he didn't want to vote. He didn't want to give the system his name. And that's what we've got to overcome. That, I think, is the biggest. That's why we have such low turnout compared to countries around the world.
And that's a system. That's a symptom of a bigger problem, which is we don't have enough opportunities for people to participate in this democracy. And so voting is one thing, but how can we and what you're saying is, let's build participatory democracy at the grassroots level and really get in, make sure that we're really including all communities in the conversation. And that's how people are going to vote too, to feel like somebody that really knows them is there. That's great. So one of the things that I would love to hear more about, and before we came on, we were talking a little bit about it, is money. It's expensive to run a campaign a lot of the time. And you're running a presidential campaign. We start by talking a little bit about, even just in terms of the registration requirements, what are some of the barriers you see in some states?
The registration, you mean to get on the ballot or to get
registered
to vote?
You were saying that there's that some places have really high fees to even.
Yeah, Oklahoma wants a $35,000 fee just to be on the ballot, in addition to a petition. That's like a poll tax. So we're suing them as on constitutional grounds. The Green Party had 21 ballots going into the election. So that meant we needed 30 more, counting DC, 50 states in DC. And we figured 1.5 million signatures, which is a big job. And then the coronavirus hit. So we had to appeal to state governments saying it's against your public health guidelines for us to go out there and ask people to sign petitions.
Right.
And we do have people doing that in Alaska and Idaho. They got gloves, they got masks, they got disinfectant swipes, they swipe the pen, they wipe down the petition every time they get a signature. But it's hard. And it's against what the public health guidelines say. So we have been writing to state governments saying, you got to give us relief. And Vermont said, yeah, you're right, you're on the ballot. Because we've been on their ballot every year since 1996. Same thing in Illinois, but Illinois said no. So we sued the state and the judge put us on the ballot. In New Jersey, the state agreed to electronic signatures, which I think are harder to get than, signatures on the street. But in any case, we've got an option.
Why is that? Why is it harder to do an electronic signature?
Because electronic appeals are easier to ignore. When, my standard line when I'm on the street is, can you help me out with a signature to put the Green Party on the ballot? Then somebody's got to say, no, I'm not going to help you out. A lot of people say, okay, yeah, everybody should be on the ballot. So they sign. Whereas if it's online, it's like, delete. That delete button is real easy. So I think, it's work. And you got to keep talking to people, get on the phone, tell them how to get online. And so it's work. but at least they gave us an option that's safer than going out on the street at this time. So, so anyway, we're working through the other states. We're on, I think, 25 ballots now, and our goal is still to get on all 51. And the petitions go through the summer. September 4th are the last 3 states' deadlines.
So what about these, automatic voter registration ideas? Which one do you think is the best option? Like, at what point should it be automatic and how should it be done?
I think it should be the government's responsibility to register people to vote.
Mm-hmm.
That means as you're leaving high school or your senior year, it's part of your civics. You just do it in school. When you show up at the Department of Motor Vehicles or the welfare office, whatever government services, once they got your name, they check and see if you're registered to vote. If you're not, they say, here's the card. You want to be a voter. Give everybody the option. And so rather than making it the responsibility of the citizen to be registered, the government should be, as people move around, like we're talking about the renters that tend to move a lot, every time they move and give a new address and it doesn't correspond to, the voter roll, correct that. So it should be the government's responsibility.
Right.
I think that's the policy we should have instead of what we have now, which allows the Republicans to go around and, purge the voter rolls for trivial reasons. And a lot of those, we saw that going back in 2000 in Florida. They were purging people now the Florida voters changed this law. If you're a former felon, you can vote in Florida now. And the voters voted for that by 2-1. But back then, so if somebody was named John Smith, there are a lot of people named John Smith, and probably one of them is in prison. So they just purged all the John Smiths. And that wasn't fair to all the John Smiths, except maybe that one that was in prison. So that's the kind of thing that should not be happening. So with the automatic voter registration, now it's on the government. And you can sue the government if they're not fulfilling their responsibility under the law. So we have recourse.
I have a question from the chat. What do you think about reducing the voting age to 16?
I like that, particularly for things like school board elections and city elections. And I'm open to it for federal elections. When I was 18, I couldn't vote, and I was facing the draft for Vietnam, and I did get drafted. So I thought, I can't even have a say, and they're going to send me off to fight some people I don't even know. So, and when I was 16, I would have liked to have voted. I was paying attention. So, yeah, I'm open to that idea. But I think the way we're going to get it done is and some cities have done this. They let younger people vote in their local elections. And I think that's good because we're weak on civic education. In the educational sector, we got this high stakes testing and tracking, and it's all about what they can measure on, and run through a computer and rank people. And so they're missing a big part of the curriculum, how to be, work collaboratively in teamwork, how to be a leader, how to be creative, how to be a critical thinker, and your history and how your government works. All that stuff gets put to the side so people can pass these standardized tests. They teach to the test. And so a lot of stuff is lost. So I think, civics education should be something, and knowing you can vote makes that high school class when you got a million things on your mind more relevant.
Right. Yeah. Especially now with the climate crisis, young people really need to have a right to vote because things are changing rapidly and this is going to be on them. So the consequences are going to be on them of what we're doing now. So they really should have the right to vote. I agree. What about, I would love to hear more about how you started getting involved in the Green Party. How did this all come about that you're running for president of the United States? And
Well, I came up in the San Francisco Bay Area in the 1960s, and I got involved very early. Civil rights was the first thing. I mean, I have cousins who were the children of one of the first Japanese war brides in World War II. And they were, military brats. They're stationed in Virginia. And as we're all headed for kindergarten and first grade, they're told they're going to the colored schools. And I'm looking around my community, which was mixed, Black, Mexican, all kinds of different Asian and Pacific Islander nationalities. I thought that's just wrong. I can't go to school with my friends if I was in Virginia. So I was outraged, and I just had that feeling. And then I'm 12 years old, 1964, civil rights movement is in full swing. And Ronald Reagan's leading a campaign by the Republicans to repeal the fair housing law in California that just passed, the Run for Fair Housing Law. And they did repeal it that year in November. So I said, well, what are the Democrats going to do? And they had a choice between the Mississippi Dixiecrats, the segregationists, or the Mississippi Freedom Democrats, who had an integrated slate and were for civil rights. And Johnson sent Humphrey and Mondale and Joseph Rao, the liberals, to tell the Freedom Democrats they had to wait. And, I'm asking, where's my party? So even then I was for a third party. I never was. Most Greens are really pissed off former Democrats, but I never was a Democrat. And so I supported Peace and Freedom Party in 1968. Peace in Vietnam, freedom was the civil rights slogan. And that became part of the People's Party, 72, 76. Then the Citizens Party, 1980, Barry Commoner, our foremost environmental scientist, who had a whole energy platform we still haven't implemented, ran in 1980. And then, because I'd been involved in the anti-nuclear movement, helped form the Clamshell Alliance, we occupied the Seabrook Nuclear Power Plant site, a big occupation, 1,414 of us, put in National Guard armories for 10 days. And it went, as we say today, viral. It was all over the news weeklies and the newspapers and the network news. I got invited to this meeting because they wanted a clamshell to send a couple people. And that was the first national organizing meeting for the Green Party in 1984. And I've stayed involved ever since because, I've been convinced since the 60s, we need a third party that's for democratic socialism, participatory democracy, and ecology. And so now, president, basically a lot of Greens around the country drafted me. I was working in the post office, during the peak season. I'm retired Teamster, but my pension got cut. That's a whole nother story. Another bipartisan stupid law they passed. And so I want to make a little extra money. I'm working 12-hour shifts, 7 hours a day. I only had 3 days off, and it wasn't Thanksgiving, Christmas, or New Year's. Minding my own business. And meanwhile, a lot of Greens formed this draft Howie committee. And it was more than that. They had a campaign manager, they had a press secretary, they had everybody ready to go. And so I opened my email in January, and it's like, Howie, we have a job for you. And took a minute, took a few months actually, but I said, okay. And, now that I'm in, I'm all in.
That's when you and I met. You were working in the post office when you came up to help us with We Are Seneca Lake.
Well, then I was a Teamster at UPS.
You were a Teamster then, were you?
Yeah.
Oh, at UPS. Okay, that's right.
Right.
I remember you had to go back to deliver packages from court. You had to leave a little bit early.
Well, yeah, unload trucks. I worked in the hub.
Yeah.
But I worked overnight shifts. So
we were just so thankful to have your help. You're always on the front lines of all the right stuff. So it's exciting to talk to you today about all this.
I was really impressed with that whole movement around Seneca Lake. I mean, it was grassroots, it was rural. It reminded me of the Clamshell Alliance in New Hampshire in the 1970s, and we won a victory.
Victories are possible. Anything is possible.
Right.
How do we, I have a question that was coming up from the Facebook, but what would it look like if we didn't have any parties at all?
I think you need parties so people are not atomized. I mean, that's what we have now. We don't really have parties in this country. The Democrats and Republicans are really memberless in the sense that you don't join, agree to some principles, and participate on a regular basis in a local chapter of the party. You want to fight fracking? You don't go to the Democratic committee. You don't go to the Republican committee. You form an anti-fracking group. Right. And the Green Party will support you, and we talk about it. But so what we have are everybody gets to vote in a primary, but before the voting primary, you had the money primary. And so all the candidates are like little startup businesses, and they go to the rich folks and say, invest in us. And the ones that get invested in are the ones that are serious, quote unquote, candidates in the primary that you vote in. So they call that the money primary. And then they advertise at people. Well, people at the grassroots don't talk to each other so they can critically evaluate what they're being told. So that's what's missing. Every other country, you belong to a political party, you agree to its principles, you sign a little form, you get a membership card, and you pay dues to support it, at least on the left, because the left doesn't have rich benefactors like some of the conservative parties, the older parties. That's what's missing in our country. So I would argue we need a first party, a real political party where, the other thing that a party can do that these single issues don't do is it can bring the different issues and constituencies together to find common ground in a common platform. If we're all single issues, we're competing for energy, time, money, people support, and we end up competing when we should be allies.
Right. You need to form a union. Political parties can be like unions. I like it. There's another question, a couple questions in the chat. One is, what is the plan for reducing the impact of the intelligence agencies on domestic politics?
Well, the CIA is not supposed to be involved. And if they are, they're breaking the law, and the Department of Justice should be all over them. National Security Agency was spying on us. Edward Snowden revealed that. And while there was some little bit of reform, it's still going on. In fact, if I was president, I would pardon all the whistleblowers. I'd drop the charges against Julian Assange, let him go free. And in the case of Edward Snowden, I bring him into the administration because he knows, what this new technology and its surveillance capabilities are. And I trust his values. He says in his book, what's it called? Permanent Record, which is the most compelling book I read last year, that the real battle in the world today is between authoritarianism and liberal democracy. And so I think he brings the right values. So he would, know how to do, and the policies we should have to do legitimate intelligence gathering, like early warning about the coronavirus, as well as, other types of national security issues, but in a way that protects our First and Fourth Amendment rights in particular, and our right to privacy in the Fourth Amendment. That's a big one for him. So he's an expert in that stuff. He has experience in the NSA and the CIA as a contractor both, and as a CIA employee. So I would bring him into the administration to help with that. Now the FBI, we got a problem because they spend more time going after Muslims with bias. And one of these whistleblowers is facing or I guess he's serving a 4-year sentence. That's Terry Albury from Minnesota. He's a child of an Ethiopian immigrant and saw, enormous bias in the FBI against Muslims and Black people and immigrants. And he revealed, some of the FBI guidebooks on how to deal with that for their bias. And he got charged and convicted for releasing what was confidential information. I give him a pardon. And so they were, they do domestic spying. And what they're not doing, and they should do a lot more of, is these right-wing racist groups that, have caused more mayhem than any other group of terrorists, in the last couple of decades, going back to Timothy McVeigh, who's from upstate New York, was. And so I think that's the people those are the most dangerous people they should be spending more time on.
Well, but they have so much to do with all these grandmothers for peace and the Quaker meetings that they're infiltrating.
Yeah, I mean, nonviolent protests, they have no business, surveilling them.
No.
It's the people that are, organizing to break laws and, commit violent acts.
Right.
And, we do need people monitoring them. That's logically what the FBI should be doing. So we need to, direct them to do the proper monitoring.
What is the, in New York particularly, do you want to talk about a little bit about what it's like for incarcerated people or formerly incarcerated people, how we can, what it's like for them now and what we can do to help them have a say in our democracy?
Well, first of all, we got to teach the parole officers that once people are on parole, they can vote. Or probation. Actually, I have to look at the form, but I think when they're on parole, but certainly on probation. The probation officers don't know that. I mean, we register people here, and we used to have in the store next to us, probation officers would meet with the people they're monitoring. And every damn parole officer didn't understand that their voting rights were restored. And they should know that. So
Yeah.
first of all, the system, the criminal justice system needs to explain to people they got their voting rights back. Now, I would say we should do like Vermont and Maine do in many European countries. You should never lose your voting rights.
Right.
Part of the rehabilitation process is to get you engaged civically, so you feel like you got a stake and some power in society and you're not totally alienated. So I think, and then we got to provide, when people come out of prison, we got to provide them with social support so they can integrate. Don't just give them $50 or whatever they were able to make with those slave wages they're being paid, working sometimes with outside companies. That should be stopped. They should be paid living wages. If you're gonna make them work, pay them. Show them that the work pays, and then they come out with some resources to get a new start. And we need to provide the services. Sometimes a lot of people, 45% of federal prisoners are in there for drug offenses. A lot of that is due to their own addictions, and they're in that game to support their addictions. So where's the medical, the drug treatment for them in prison and when they come out? Finding a home. Do we just send them back to the streets where they got in trouble in the first place? Or should we enable them to get into a new environment where, their old friends and old grudges and old pressures don't force them back to what they were doing before? That makes a difference. I know a group of men in South Central LA that were, they were doing drug deals here in Syracuse. This is now 30 years ago. And the group of them just decided we're going to have a new start. And they all went out to LA, and they've all got, regular jobs, and they got homes and families, and they're cool. If they come back to the streets here, their old friends might have got them back in trouble. So we should enable, people coming out to have a fresh start.
Yeah. It's hard. The whole point is we want more people to participate. So to take the vote away seems just like the last thing you want to do. Do you have anything else about getting, making elections, making the voting process more fair, or making elections and running for office more fair?
Yeah, I think the game changer is instant runoff voting, both in executive offices, single offices, and even more proportional representation in legislative bodies. That will change the whole dynamic. You get a multi-party system then.
How does that
And instead of two parties where it's a zero-sum game, it pays to go negative. In a multi-party system, you have to maintain relationships with the other parties because you're going to need them. Like the Libertarians and Greens are on the same page on drug policy reform, on civil liberties, and on staying out of stupid foreign wars. But when it comes to economics, they're more with the Republicans, and at least the progressive Democrats are more with us. So the coalitions shift, and it doesn't pay to go negative in that environment. If you have ranked choice voting, you want those people that rank another candidate first. You want them to rank you second. Mm-hmm. So you don't attack the other candidate. You just present your positive program and hope to attract them. So you'd have a whole different kind of politics. So I think, that is one thing we can get. That's the game changer. And you get all the parties, not just in the election, but in the legislature. And the discussion continues. The other one is getting the private money out of politics. And back in the 90s, there was a clean money model, which meant if you agree to the public financing, you have no private financing. You get every candidate that qualifies gets an equal grant. Mm-hmm. Maine and Arizona did this. North Carolina did it for their judges for a while until the Tea Party got in there and repealed that. And in Maine, those Maine Republicans love it as much as the Democrats and the Greens and everybody, because they don't have to go around begging for money. They get a grant, they can run a good campaign for their state legislative seats. They're small districts compared to New York. It's not that big a grant, but they like that. Same thing in Arizona. What we've been doing recently is matching funds. New York just adopted a system, which I don't like because it doesn't take the private money out. You're just putting some public money on top of the old private money. Right. And then it magnifies the difference. If you're a Green running for state assembly, you get $10,000 that qualifies for matching. It's a 6-to-1 match. So you end up with 70,000. But you're running against an incumbent Democrat that's got $100,000 they can match. They get 700,000. So instead of a $90,000 difference, you now have a $630,000 difference. The matching fund system magnifies the inequality and doesn't get the private money out. I say it's a reform that doesn't really reform. So I'm for full public campaign financing on a clean money model. That would be a big difference, because then, the wealthy interests couldn't buy our elections and dominate the whole process. So I think that's a major reform that we need to look at. And unfortunately, they passed this matching funds. It just passed. So we'll need somebody like you in the legislature to raise the issue again, because they're going to say we did that, but they didn't do it right.
Yeah, it sounds like it. What if we just went to all electronic voting? What do you think about that, like online voting?
Well, I'm concerned about the security. I think you always want a paper trail so the vote can be audited.
Yeah.
And so, I don't mind, paper ballots that get counted by machine. You can audit that. I've seen here in Onondaga County them take a sample and, check the count against the sample. And, they're pretty conscientious about it, and they've never found any irregularities. So, but you always want to be able to look to the paper ballots if there's any question. In a close election, you can do a hand count. Everybody can watch you. And then you get a result people can be confident in.
Yeah, that's how I feel about it too. People have been bringing it up because it would be so convenient, but I'm worried about that as well. I would Diebold in all of the dirty deeds that have gone on for quite some time. Howie, can you tell us a little bit, if this is off topic of fair elections, but it's a topic that I'm thinking about a lot, this question about defunding or even abolishing the police. Have you thought about that at all?
Yeah, I got a statement. I put out a bunch of statements. I got another one coming out. I think where the movement's at right now, I would say defunding is not enough.
Mm-hmm.
What we're getting because of this mass movement is we're getting a response on policing practices. And they're good policies. But what's missing there is the police still work for themselves. They still govern themselves. And we have review boards, but they are appointed by politicians and they don't have many powers. I go back to the old Black Panther Party proposal that I watched them do a referendum on in Berkeley in 1970, an elected police commission. And some people are saying it should be randomly selected like a jury to get the politics completely out of it. And that commission hires and fires the police chief. It can clean house of the racists and the sadists in the force now. And we know the right wing, the racists have been recruiting people to law enforcement. And we see the results of that, like in the Border Patrol on that damn Facebook page that half of the Border Patrol was on with all those racist comments. They would have the power to negotiate the union contracts and get rid of those clauses that give special shielding to police officers for misconduct. They would review budgets and policies and be able to investigate and discipline officers. So you wouldn't have internal affairs doing that. That's the problem. The other thing we have to realize is that the police do what they were set up to do by the power structure, by the politicians. Police in inner cities, people of color communities, their purpose is to keep downscale people down and out of the upscale communities. Mm-hmm. And, sometimes people say it's all the police fault. No, it's the politicians and the power structure behind them. What's the power structure in most cities? It's the real estate industry, the developers, the landlords. And they're the ones that enforce this segregation. And so you gotta get at the root of the problem. The first thing is community control of the police so they work for us, not the power structure that has been discriminated against in exploiting particularly communities of color. And then when we talk about defunding, I was looking at the Vera Institute for Justice the other day. Only less than 5% of arrests are for violent crimes. And then another less than 13% for serious property crimes. That means 85% of what the police do is harass people for non-criminal behavior and for stuff that shouldn't be criminal. Like if you're homeless, you're not a vagrant, you need a home. If you're a drug addict, you're not a criminal, you need drug treatment, you need medical attention. It's a health problem. If you're having a mental breakdown, a crisis, you need a mental health expert, not a guy with a gun and a shield and who's not an expert in that, and whose instinct is to arrest and write tickets. So maybe we can get rid of 80-85% of what the police do now. And the other thing is, when it does come to those violent and property crimes, they only clear them 25% of the time with arrests. They're not good at solving crimes. And we know that, and this goes back, this is the same Vera Institute, it was FBI statistics and national surveys of people. 60% of victims of violent and serious property crimes don't even tell the police because they don't trust them to do a job, or they're afraid they'll get in trouble. Right. So, the policing that should be being done is not being done well. And then, okay, you take the whole budget from the police department and put it into the community needs for these other services. It's a drop in the bucket of what's needed. We need a massive federal investment to, rebuild these communities that have been impoverished by generations of discrimination and exploitation. So, I call for a Green New Deal. The Urban League's called for a Marshall Plan for the cities since the 60s. That's what's needed. And I hope the movement will raise their expectations. Let's not just reallocate some of the municipal police budgets. Let's get the federal government to really invest in our communities. And let's not just ban chokeholds. Let's have the police work for us instead of themselves and govern themselves and discipline themselves. That has not worked. Mm-hmm. So, that's my thought on that. And then the other big thing, and this statement is coming out tomorrow, 3 demands: community control, social investment, and decriminalize drugs. Let's do like Portugal. There, instead of being a criminal offense, if you have an illicit drug, you get a ticket and you go to a hearing and you're there with a doctor, a lawyer, and a social worker. Mm-hmm. And they say, how can we help you with this problem? And sometimes it's drug treatment. Sometimes somebody needs a job. Sometimes they need counseling. They're using drugs to cope with a problem that can be dealt with better other ways. And they've been doing that since 2001 there. They don't have drug overdoses. Drug crime is very low. And less people actually use hard drugs than they did before. That's a rational solution. The war on drugs has really been a war on communities of color and led to mass incarceration. We have the biggest prison system in the history of the world. 4% of the world's population, 25% of the prisoners. It's an abject failure. And so those are some of my thoughts on where we're at now. And I think I said this earlier. I'm encouraged that it's a mass multiracial movement. Yeah. People are saying, enough is enough. Let's get this corrected.
Yeah. Well, and there are ramifications in so many different sectors. You're finding coalitions of people who are coming together you wouldn't have expected on this movement. It's great. Thank you, Howie, so much for joining us. I really, it's always such a pleasure to talk to you. I always learn, you learn so much. So I really appreciate you doing this. Thank you.
Well, I enjoyed being on, and good luck next Tuesday in your election.
Well, thank you very much. Good luck in your election too.
Thank you.
All right. Good night, everybody. Thank you for joining us. And looks like we have some things to do to reform elections and make them more fair and accessible and allow us to vote our heart. Good night.